Well, good morning, John. Welcome to the Business of Story.
Well, good morning, Park. Thanks for having me on the show.
And I know you're coming to us from Vancouver, Washington, which, of course, I grew up in the Seattle area, north end of Seattle, up Bothell, Woodinville area. So I'm always delighted to speak with fellow Pacific Northwesterners.
Yeah, the Northwest, the land of forests and streams and rivers and waterfalls.
And rain. And that's why I ended up in Arizona.
Yeah, so I've been here 5 years, and the rain is the hardest part, right?
Yeah,
So there's actually, so I'm from Southern California. There is no hibernation cycle in Southern California because it's sunny all the time.
right.
There is a hibernation cycle in the Northwest. You know, when the you're only getting 8 hours a day of sunlight, it's the time where you feel okay to hang out inside and get your work done, and you don't have to go outside and do all kinds of things. And then when summer comes, it's spring, summer, it's glorious.
Well, we grew up, me and my 6 siblings, on what my parents called the Happy H, which was a little 12-acre ranchette out there in Woodinville area. And we just never knew anything different than go outside in the rain. And my mom would always say, when we were roughhousing in the house and driving her crazy, she'd say, get your things on and go outside. And we'd be like, but it's 34 degrees and raining, Mom. She goes, get them on and get out of here. And then it wasn't until, we started going over to Eastern Washington, which is decidedly more dry, arid, and warm, and go and see my grandparents in Wenatchee, Washington, where there was sun and warmth. And it was 2.5 hours away. And I'm like, why don't we live here? And that's
Well,
what opened my eyes up to it.
from Vancouver, I mean, you just have to get on the other side of the Cascades. Same thing
Yeah.
happens, right? So you can get out, what they call get out from under the lid, if you go an hour and a half east,
Yeah.
because then you're in sort of the upper desert and there's lots of sun. But the clouds just get trapped up against the Cascade Mountains and they stay right on top of Portland, and that's why it's wet and rainy for so long.
Yeah.
It's taken me time to learn how to. This year was better than any other. I moved from Southern California in 2020. 2020 for a lot of people was a tough year. The pandemic was there, but I also got a divorce and I also had heart surgery. So it was a really challenging year for me. And it's what sent me to the Northwest. I decided I was going to leave Southern California. I wanted to change, had a lot of family up here in the Northwest, and, packed everything up in my car, sold everything else, and moved to the Northwest.
Well, glad you did, and I'm glad you're here with us today. And what caught me, as we were talking about earlier, is I probably get 20 to 30 requests to be guests on the podcast every week, and I turn down most of them because they just weren't, aren't applicable basically to my audience. And yours came in just the other day, and it was interesting to me because you've got this chess background. And I don't know if you were a chess master or what it is about your chess background, but it's fascinating to me of how you were bringing that now to corporate training, leadership development, and so forth. So could you give us a little bit of your background?
Sure, sure. Never reached the level of chess master. I reached the level of a high A player, just below an expert level. And this was in high school, and our team had a chess team, and I played chess. My father taught me how to play, and first time I played against those guys, they just mopped the board with me, and I realized that there was something more to it, and so I began to study. And when I was a sophomore in high school, the advisor got a coach. His name was Ken Commons, international master, pretty sharp guy, and he says, "Hey, I got 4 things I'm going to work you with you. Things not to worry about. Don't think about these things. Spend time thinking about these things. I'm going to go over your games with you and read this book." And literally 2 months later, I won a couple of tournaments and my rating went sky high. And I actually had a paper route. That's how I made money. And I bought a bus ticket to San Jose to play in the Palmason Championships. $40 round trip. This was back in 1976. Gosh, that's that's a 16-hour bus ride. That's crazy. But I stayed at my mother's cousin's, Jimmy, and he drove me up the mountain to Palmason, and I went 5-0 in that tournament. I won the tournament. I won $1,000, and I bought a plane ticket home because I didn't want to. And a plane ticket then was stupid. I mean, I think I spent $400 on that plane ticket home, and that's ridiculous in today's dollars, but I didn't want to take the bus back home. And with that event, I got invited to the United States Chess Championships in Philadelphia in 1976 to play in their class championships. I did not play in the open section. But everybody that plays in an event like that is a player where their skill set is on the rise. And I ended up winning 3.5 points out of 5, which probably the top 25% of that group. And what I realized later on, as I went into the business world, right, is that chess focus, which is really strategy and tactics and then executing, right, the right move at the right time, it has influenced my life forevermore. And that's how I approach life in the business world, right? What's the strategy? What are the tactics that we're going to take? And how do we execute that? In what order do we want to take those tactics? And, that's where we find that, small business in particular, great ideas, a lot of visionaries, a lot of really wonderful people. But this idea of converting strategy into execution is a gap. There's really and they just don't know how to do it. We have people that know how to execute the tactics. They're what we call order takers or doers. And we have people that know how to do the strategy, but that gap in between of going from strategy to execution at the right time is a space that, frankly, a lot of small business owners need help with.
Yeah, and when I got your, registration to be on the show, I was looking for your bio, my guest rap sheet, and I couldn't find it because it was stuck in the spam folder. And so I thought, oh my goodness, I got to prepare for John. So I simply ran your brand through our Story Cycle Genie to give me intel on your brand. And, in about 2 minutes, it gave me a complete assessment of your brand and who you are and what you're about. And then in about another 3 minutes, it gave me your brand narrative. So I'm using it as intel. And what I found so interesting is how what you do in the world parallels what we are doing with the Story Cycle Genie, because it says, like, your audience number one, growth constrained business owners. And it says the challenges: scaling operations while maintaining quality and personal involvement in key decisions. Fears: losing control of company culture and values during rapid growth phases. Frustrations: feeling trapped by success with limited time freedom despite business achievements. And finally, their aspirations: what do they want? Building a scalable, saleable business platform that operates without constant oversight. So is that pretty accurate?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That Story Cycle Genie thing you used is really, really good. And you just described about 95% of the small business owners in the country, maybe even in the world. I don't know much more outside of the United States, but, again and again, I meet with small business owners routinely, and that scenario comes up again and again and again. They build a team, maybe themselves and a couple others, where they can control and manage everything, and they generate revenue and they've got some consistency. But the concept of how do I get bigger and get to the next stage? How do I implement systems and processes? They don't have any skill set in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really what I bring to the table. And how do I take that, what we need to do, and put it into a strategic plan so that you can monitor and execute?
Yeah, and I found in my research, I think probably what you're talking to as well, is that roughly 95% of all North American businesses are small businesses, meaning that they are doing less than 10 million in annual revenue. And your market is between that 500,000 and 5 million revenue, and you are trying to help them expand and get over that $10 million mark and beyond. And you're playing off of strategy, tactics, and execution. And do you find, John, that these small business owners are typically good at one of those things and they need help in, the other two?
They're generally very good at managing themselves. In other words, they understand the strategy and they can control themselves, and so they can execute. They may not be really well versed in tactics, from a marketing or sales standpoint, and there's some places where they can improve. The place where they really struggle is managing their team, bringing people and hiring the right people, and effectively leveraging their team. The first step is typically to tell the team member what to do, and then the team member goes and does it. Well, if that's all you ever do, you're stuck always telling all those team members what to do, and eventually you run out of time. You can only do that so much. And so what you really want to do is bring in a team member that can take ownership and understands how to not only execute that tactic, but how to grow and make decisions on their own, because that's where your team is going to add value to you. Otherwise, they'll help you to some degree that you can get to a certain volume, but they're going to restrict you after that.
So is your brain so steeped in chess growing up as a young man and having it, just embedded in what you do, that you quite often reach back to, I don't know if it be chess moves or opening moves or anything like that help inform how you guide your customers?
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. Chess, the goal is to capture the king. It's the same goal every game. And you have your pieces, and the opponent has his pieces. And the more effectively you allocate your pieces, the better you use them, the more likely it is you're going to capture the king. You're going to, obviously you have to play defense too, but you really have to have a great understanding of the pieces and what they do and where to put them and how they can exert pressure and force. Same thing happens in business. Your pieces, your resources become your pieces. So the goal isn't always capture the king. You get to set whatever goal you want as a business owner. And your resources change, but you're the number one resource, right? Because you have 100% control over what you do. But then as you add different team members, they become resources also. And as you generate cash, that becomes a resource. And so it all comes down to, how do I allocate these resources so that they point everything effectively towards accomplishing that goal? So very similar, but different.
Yeah. Well, you've got the chess background. Tell us about your business background. How and have you been successful in applying this approach to other companies?
So, well, I'll tell you, I started out in corporate. I spent 30 years in multi-billion-dollar corporate. The last client I served, I was working for CB Richard Ellis, which is a large real estate firm. The last client I served was
know them well here in Arizona.
You bet. And so my client was Bank of America, and I was the Western Regional construction manager. So we ended up starting with one project in 1996 as they transitioned to us. And then in 2 years, we had 1,500 projects going on and about $500 million worth of work. It was just the most volume I'd ever messed with before. And again, now every little thing plays a big role, because, if you're running 8 projects and you make a mistake, you can kind of recover. But if you're running 1,500 projects and you make 12% mistakes, that's just a giant number. And so every little thing has to be dialed in to the sort of the nth degree. And when in 2010, I kind of got to the point where I was done with that. And there was also the Great Recession, and the group that I worked with moved to Dallas, and I was in Southern California. My kids were there and I didn't want to move to Dallas. And so that's when I launched my practice. And I started working with small business owners. Now, I bought a focal point practice. I won't go into the details about that, but I bought a practice so I could learn how to be a coach. I've done lots of coaching, but there's a skill set to coaching. How do you work with, ask questions, interview? How do you find clients is another story that is really important there too, right? And I began working with these businesses, anywhere from sort of a one-man band to 200, 250 employees. And depending on what you're dealing with, the problems are slightly different. And so you have to then build a solution, but it still comes down to, what are the resources? What are the constraints? And how do I resolve those constraints with these resources? So in a one-man band, it might be, you need to know, the constraint is you're not getting your word out. And so we need to put together a marketing system or a marketing plan, but maybe you don't know how to do a marketing plan. So you've got to learn how to do a marketing plan, and then you can execute the marketing plan. In a bigger business, they probably already have a marketing plan. They probably already have a sales plan. They probably have all of those things already. But they've got a certain specific issue or challenge in an area or a region. And the same thing happens, though. We look at our resources, what's available. Do we have the right resources aligned in the right places? And can we point them in the right directions to achieve better results? And ultimately, that got to be honest with you, it works every single time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I are playing in the same arena, I think, because with the Story Cycle Genie, it is meant to democratize world-class branding. And what we hear so often from the small to medium-sized business owner is brand development is overwhelming. I'm not even sure where to start. I don't have the money to pay for an expensive ad agency to come in and do this for me. And then how do I know if what I got is any good? And that's just the beginning. That's just strategy. And then tactics, like you were talking about. How do I activate this story in the world? I don't even know where to begin, and I'm going to burn months of time and money trying to figure that out. And then ultimately, the execution. Who writes this stuff? Who does the videos for us? Who creates our PowerPoints and so forth? And that's what the genie does for you. And like you saw, it turns out overwhelmed into overjoyed, what we like to say, because it literally crafted your brand story in a couple minutes. And then you can move on to strategy. And then you can move on to activation. How do you execute on that? And the genie will provide you all of that guidance and the content based on your brand story.
Yeah, like I said, I was totally impressed with what you sent me. I'm like, I don't know how you got that in 5 minutes, but that was pretty good. And you're right, it is a classic challenge. So the small business owner, the solopreneur, so to speak, they can manage themselves, and so the way they market is they go network and they can tell somebody else what their business is, and they can sell at the same time because they can see whether the other person understands, and they can ask questions and they can kind of go back and forth. We get into the actual digital or high end, or I guess it's a different kind of marketing, right? Where you're not actually meeting with somebody. It's a one-way message. And if they don't want to respond, you don't hear anything back. If they don't, unless you've written it well or you've done it well, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens is the small business owner gets stuck in the networking thing forever, or they have to go your route and say, hey, let's build a brand. Let's figure out how do we share this brand with the population, with the audience that we're looking for. And that feels incredibly overwhelming to a small business owner. And when you can take your system and in 5 minutes create the brand and say, okay, now it's just about how do we get this brand out to the marketplace. I mean, that's a big, big piece, because if you don't have that, you could send anything to the marketplace, it won't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can create that social strategy off of it, and that takes about 5 minutes. And then you can create your content calendar. Takes maybe another 3 minutes, and then your content. But let's get back to your story. It identified these three audiences. We talked about the first one, that was growth constrained business owners, which to me is kind of an overarching audience, because there could be a lot of subsets to that. And the genie identified two others. And I thought this was interesting too, because I was thinking about you from that chess background, but it goes so much deeper than that. You, audience number two, work with values-driven executives. So that means that you are sorting through your clientele coming in. If someone shows up and says, hey, John, I want your help, but you identify them as not a terribly value-driven individual, you probably aren't going to work with them. So for these values-driven executives, their challenges balancing profit maximization with authentic leadership and ethical business practices. Fears: compromising personal values for business success or market competitiveness. Frustrations: finding strategic guidance that honors both business objectives and personal integrity. And then finally, aspirations: leading with generosity while achieving sustainable competitive advantage. So what that told me is you are a left brain, right brain practitioner. The left brain is that very logic, reason, chess master almost guy driving it, but you are really driven on purpose. You've got values and you want to help people express their values to help grow their business. Do I have that right?
Yes. The term that I've got in my brand is heart-centered tactician, right? So let's take these values, and I will also tell you that there might be some value-driven small business owners, but they really don't understand it. They don't have a definition of what their values are. So really getting clarity around those values and why those values are important. Everybody's a little bit different. That's fine. We have a little exercise where we go through five, because you can write your stories around those five values. And then what we do, the thing I really moved into is this generosity concept, because generosity in itself is a differentiator. It's the umbrella that you can put over the top of everything you're doing in your organization and make it better. It's like that sauce that makes everything taste better. So when you're generous, a lot of people jump into money right away, but there's a lot more ways to be generous than just money. You've got time and treasure and talent. And, if you're generous with your time, helping somebody, there's an appreciation and a gratitude that comes along with that. If you're generous with your talent, there's an appreciation and a gratitude that goes along with that. If you're generous with all three of those, same thing happens. And you differentiate yourself from the rest of the market, because the rest of the market looks at it more from just a profit-driven perspective.
Yeah, and you develop way deeper connections, emotional relationships with your colleagues, with your customers, and the communities you serve if you're leading with that generosity mindset.
Again, I agree with you, deeper relationships, but I think you have a more premium product as well. So people don't move from you because the next person doesn't have that. The next company doesn't have that. Employees don't leave you. Good talent and retaining talent is important. They don't leave because the next company doesn't have what you're bringing to the table. It's an intangible that the next person doesn't have, which allows you to retain employees, retain customers, um, and become known as a premium product provider.
Yeah. So the Genie identified that in your brand. And by the way, it visited your website and it visited your LinkedIn bio. That's where it was pulling its intel from. And it created this position statement for you, John. Do you already have a position statement for your consultancy?
I wouldn't say that it has it to the degree that you've got. Um, and so, I think in terms of who do I serve? Why do I serve? The value that I bring. And I can outline that pretty simply and easily. We already kind of talked a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that clarity and brevity are incredibly important in today's world because people don't have extra time to figure stuff out. So I really appreciated the position statement that you guys came up with.
Yeah, the Genie says your position is BusinessWhitt is the only strategic business coaching firm that combines proven growth methodologies with generosity first leadership principles to create scalable, values aligned business success.
And I have the second half of that, but I didn't have the only, right? The only one that does. I didn't have that because
Oh, you got to carve out that market position, right?
right,
As the only.
right. And yeah, so I got a little work to do.
Well, but that's what the Genie does. It validates what you're already doing well. And the fact that it picked up on your generosity first mindset means you are doing a good job of communicating that. It then reveals, highlights gaps and or missed opportunities that you can quickly fix in your brand storytelling. And it provides you fresh, new, clear insights on how to maybe tell your story, because we're also buried in the fog of war of our own story. We're so close to it, as they say, we're in the jar, so we can't read the label outside that everyone else is reading. So it gives you new ways to think about your brand. In your case, it took all of that and your unique value proposition. Do you have a unique value proposition already?
Well, it's unique to the extent that if you combine my chess background and the generosity theme, the generosity umbrella, there isn't anybody else out there that is doing the same. At least not that I've found, not that I've discovered.
Yeah. And it didn't really lean into the chess thing. It did. Your UVP, it says, is scalable business growth through generosity-driven strategic leadership.
Well, I think it's all of that. But I think when you add in strategy, tactics, and execution, that model, the book I wrote, there is a book out there on Amazon called Checkmate, because of my chess background, Winning Tactics for Translating Ideas into Money. And that outlines my framework. It's a 5-step lather, rinse, repeat framework. You start with clarity, and I think everything starts with clarity. And then it goes into team. Who are the people that you need to work with that can help you, that can support you, because nobody does it all by themselves. And then we go into a testing model, right? Let's test and measure to make sure that we are going to be successful this activity. And we go into planning. If we've guaranteed that, if we've demonstrated, if we've validated that it's going to be successful, then we can go into planning and talk about rollout. And then ultimately, we have to have a change management system that allows us to adapt to changing conditions, because markets change, plans change, everything changes. Like as soon as you're done with the plan, it starts to change. And you just have to have a system or a process that allows you to course correct so you continue to bring yourself towards your goal. And that strategy concept is very similar to the way I look at chess, because you have to have clarity, you have to have your plan. Your team becomes the pieces that you have. Testing is really practicing, right? It's where you test your different moves, and this is about you getting better. And then if you can take that to the tournament, you can execute the plan, and even the best plans don't work out. And so in the middle of the game, you realize that something's happening different that you didn't foresee, and you've got to make an adjustment. And if you don't make an adjustment, what happens? You lose. Right? There's no sense taking one step farther if the plan is not going to work. It just means you got to stop and readjust the plan. And it happens whether you're in business or a chess in lots of different places. People continue
So,
to go down the plan without it working.
so one area that we haven't talked about that seems very obvious to me in your skills is that we've talked about the chess side and we've talked about the generosity first side, but your experience at CB in real estate and producing and having to create all of those projects that you had to roll your sleeves up, get your hands dirty. And yeah, you might be in a leadership management role, but I know what construction's like because I came from that world with my dad being a civil engineer and me being a laborer to put myself through college. But that plays a big role in what you are bringing to the table. It's not just the chess, it's not just the generosity first, but it's your actual 30 years experience building out projects.
Yes. So, when you've built literally thousands of projects, you kind of understand the systems and the processes that you need. And it starts with clarity. Same concept, right? What are we building? Where's it going to go? Why are we doing it? What's it supposed to do when it's done? Right? Okay, so what are the guys who needs to be on this? We have general contractor, architect, engineer, all the different resources that you have. And how do we use them to help us build the plan? And how do we use them to help execute the plan? And then obviously we've got to hire the builders because I'm not the quote builder, I'm the manager. And then I think the other piece is when we got to that level of volume, we didn't get that because I did all those projects, right? I had a team of 45 and we had people in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and California. But you're trying to run a lean team as well. And so then it becomes, how do I leverage all of these resources? And so it was about educating the team on how they can build systems and processes that allow them to run more projects. Eventually, we built a big giant software solution because we had no way to keep track of all the numbers. And I actually moved from construction project management into technology project management. The company said, hey, we know people that know how to do that construction thing. We don't have anybody. The internet had just come along. We don't know anybody who knows how to do that technology thing. And I couldn't have told you at that time that I was an expert at technology, but I had an idea about how it would work. And so then it was get the people in, get the clarity, test the ideas, follow that same framework. And we built a system that would keep track of it. And I think we had 400 users in that system at the beginning when we first rolled it out.
Yeah, my brother Tom, who just retired from Hewitt, was a lifer there, and he built gigantic projects like highways and freeways, a lot of infrastructure. When Hewitt back in 2010 was going through a whole ERP renovation, I think they spent $300 million on it. At the first time when they started doing it, it wasn't working. The project wasn't working, and they brought Tom in, said, we need you to take over KeyCore, just like you did, it sounds like, John. And over the course of the next couple of years, you've got to make this thing up and running. And Tom told me, he goes, I just approached it like a construction project.
Yeah.
I used all the exact same things that I was taught in Hewitt, building out these gigantic freeway projects. And I applied that systems thinking to creating KeyCore for them. And by golly, they brought it in. I don't know if that it was under budget, probably wasn't, but it was on time. And they're still using that today. So interesting parallel there.
Well, yeah. And your brother, I'm certain, understood that the planning component is only one piece. If we don't have the clarity and the people and the testing done in advance, then the planning part doesn't work. So most people think of project and project management as building a schedule. No, it's a lot more than that, especially if you'd like to have a successful project, right? It's all about scope and schedule and cost. All three of those things have to come out in the right place to create a successful project.
And your 5-step framework can be really applied to any sort of change initiative. It doesn't have to be a big technology project. It could be sales, it could be marketing, it could be team development. And so you got to start first with clarity of mission. What is it we're doing and what story are we going to tell about that? Then we need to assemble the right people around us to prod and poke and make sure that what we're doing is right and that we got the right people in the right places to make that happen. Then, like you said, you got to test it. Is what we have assembled here, is it even doable? And if it is doable, is it even going to move the needle? So you got to just make sure it's all going to work. They say, hey, I think we're actually onto something here. It goes into the planning phase. Let's plan how we're going to execute this. And then finally, what was the last one is measure,
Yeah,
change
change.
management.
You know,
Yeah.
so you're going to measure it, make sure that you're on track. And the reality is, you're going to be off track a bunch of times, and you're going to have to course correct. It's the same thing as that plane that's flying from New York to Los Angeles. It's off course most of the time, but autopilot keeps correcting it, and you end up in Los Angeles, and you land the plane. So one other thing that's really important, and I share this in the book, is the mindset, right? The mindset for success, right? It's all well and good to have all the strategies and everything else, but I talk about having the attitude of a champion, right? If you think about a gold medal Olympian, right? What are the things that person has to have to earn a gold medal? Now, you don't have to be a gold medalist, but you've got to have diligence and perseverance and persistence, and because there are going to be curveballs that show up at you day in, day out that you're going to have to deal with. And some of those testing things, you think it's going to work, and all of a sudden it doesn't. Now you're back to the drawing board. You've got to, it's going to take a lot to get through that. And then I talk about the heart of a leader, right? So when you talk about leading people, that's about leading people, right? It's one thing to be logical and say, look, this happens and this happens and this happens, but people, most complex organism on the planet. And, if you're going to lead them effectively, you have to have the heart of a leader. And then the last one is this willingness to test and try and learn from your mistakes, willingness to make mistakes and learn from those and consider them to be lessons as opposed to failures.
Yeah. Can I really emphasize that too? Because I experienced this with the launch of the Genie. Is you make mistakes and you put stuff out there you think is going to be a home run, and it doesn't work. It falls flat on its face. And people, including myself, tend to start beating themselves up. I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing. Why did I even try that? Or you put something out there you don't really even give a second thought to, and it blows up great. It's like, wow. And you're like, how come I didn't see that? How come I didn't know that was going to work? So it's that internal story you're telling yourself along the way too. And how do you help leaders overcome that, where they just get beaten down by the failures when those failures are all little learning moments?
Well, everybody's different, but understand that a lot of advancements that humanity has made is because they learned how not to do it. And so sometimes you can't figure out how to do it until you know what doesn't work. We don't learn much if we're instantly successful with something. We didn't learn a lot, right? That doesn't mean we're going to be instantly successful with another thing. But when you go through the process of testing and measuring and learning and adapting, that's a life skill, not just business, but a life skill. And it allows you to understand that if you hadn't gone through the fire, so to speak, you wouldn't have come out on the other side in that position where you're ready to take the next step, take the next level.
A great book, and I've talked about this several times on my show this year, and my co-creator of the Genie, Sean Schroeder, recommended it to me, and it's one of the great, and if you haven't read it, John, I think you would find it really interesting. It's called The Right It, written by Alberto Savoia. And Alberto was one of the first Google innovation engineers, and everything they did, they touched gold because they were Google and they were starting, a brand new category. And he thought his, shit didn't stink. He thought he could do anything. And then he left Google and started his own startups, and a bunch of them failed. And he's like, what in the world's going on? Ended up at Stanford. He's a professor there. He works with startups, but he wrote this marvelous book called The Right It, and we've used it to help guide us with the launch of the Story Cycle Genie. And it talks exactly about what you said right there. He went from thinking he was God, that he could do anything, to being a complete, loser at a lot of that stuff. And then he wanted to find, why is that? And he essentially says the same thing. You got to test, plan, test, and then pay attention to those failures, because they are going to guide you to your successes.
In many ways, in life, we might complain about our lot or some event that happens, and you can say, why did God do this to me? A different approach is to say, why did God do this for me? What am I supposed to learn from this activity? Why did I have to go through this? It's because there's something out on the other side that's going to take you to another level. But if you get stuck in the why is this happening to me, now you're in the victim mindset, and now you're really stuck. You can't get out of that. So whether you're a believer or just working through life, why did this happen? What am I supposed to learn from this?
Well, that's so interesting because the genie found your number 3 audience as being faith integrated business leaders. Challenges: integrating Christian principles into practical business strategy and decision making. Fears: being perceived as less competitive or professional due to faith-based approach. Frustrations: lack of business coaching that understands and supports faith-integrated leadership. And finally, their aspirations: what do they want? Building a legacy business that honors God while creating meaningful impact.
Well, I love that. And I'll tell you, I'm, excuse me, I'm a born again Christian. I didn't become a Jesus follower until I was in my 50s. So I spent 50 years in the secular world, and I totally understand that. I've come to the conclusion, and the reason why I'm a believer today is that there's a reason why all these things are happening. Um, and I think if you're running a business and you want to be a faith-based business, the idea is not to kind of ram it down somebody's throat, right? It's to share the message as to why it's valuable, why it's important, and then offer the conversation. And if somebody doesn't want the conversation, you don't do it, right? But if they're interested, you expose them and give them an opportunity to ask questions, and then you can build an even deeper relationship. I wouldn't say it's easy, but that's the model.
Well, nothing's easy, right?
If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Yeah, you don't learn anything from easy, that's for sure. This leads to your brand purpose statement as the genie pulled all of that together. And we'll talk in just a second about your archetypes, because I was curious how you felt like those archetypes, the personality of the brand, your brand, the way it's showing up in the world. I'll come back to that in just a second. But your brand purpose statement, and this is the genie is programmed such to, at the end of this, is elevate everything up beyond making money. Why do I do what I do? How do I help elevate all those people around me? And whenever I say all those people, I boil it down to the 3 C's: your colleagues, your customers, and the communities you serve, right? Your purpose statement, it says, is to prove that generosity-driven leadership creates superior business outcomes, transforming how successful entrepreneurs view the relationship between values and competitive advantage.
Well, I tell people generosity always delivers better long-term results. I mean, I'll tout that from the mountaintop. But to prove it is a whole nother story. And so think in terms of a salesperson. This is the best story I've got that way. Salesperson, you build a relationship and you sell this product and you sell it for as much as you can possibly get. And even though there's problems, you kind of just deal with it. You take the money and you run. There is no such thing as a referral in that space. There's no second time buyer. There's no, right? So generosity, if you take care of that person, right, you make sure that they're served over and above the money that you receive, then the long-term result is going to be additional purchases and referrals and lots of opportunity that shows up. The short run, you might make a little bit more money and save a little bit of time in this short run, but not in the long run. And in business isn't a short run game. We're in this for the long haul. If you think you're going to build, most people don't build a business and have it be successful and sell it in 1 year. I mean, these are 20-year things.
Yeah, I laugh at that. In my book, Brand Bewitchery, I write, one of my thoughts that still cracks me up today is that every shortcut, John, I ever tried to take in business just led to disaster faster.
Yeah, that's right. Shortcuts are, after you've taken the long route and you found a better way to get there quicker, that's not really a shortcut. That's process engineering. But if you just try to take a shortcut, you end up falling in the creek. It just doesn't work that way.
That's such good advice. And that's why your primary archetype, according to the Story Cycle Genie, is the sage. And here's what it says about you, because it gives you reasoning in this, right? BusinessWhitt embodies the sage archetype through its commitment to sharing wisdom, providing strategic guidance, and helping leaders understand the deeper principles of successful business growth. The brand's 15 plus years of experience, published methodology, and systematic approach to coaching demonstrate the sage's core desire to understand truth and share knowledge for the betterment of others?
I try to do that on a daily basis. A lot of the content that I publish quite a bit of content because I'm actually like to write. It's my way of communicating with the world. Um, but it's all about, how can I provide gifts? How can I share the talents that I have? If you can take what I have and what I've written and run with it and make it work, I applaud you. Right? Now, a lot of people, they don't do that, right? They need somebody to help them. They need some accountability. They need to do it in community. They want to work with some other people, and I provide that also. But I really just want you to be successful.
Mm-hmm. And then, so SAGE is fairly accurate as your number one primary
Yeah.
archetype. Would you say that? And what I would do, and this is what you can do inside the Genie, if I were you, I would go in then and say, I like SAGE and the family of SAGE, but now I want you to come up with a descriptor that is more generosity / faith-based that captures the SAGE archetype. And it would go and it would look at it and would come up with an even more specific archetype for you in the SAGE family, but would speak even more directly or clearly to your generosity first, faith-based approach, systematic approach. So that's what the Genie does. You can really fine tune it that way. The two secondary archetypes was not a surprise to me. The second one actually was, but the first secondary is caregiver, because I can just tell by talking to you and your approach that you are there as a caregiver to help businesses expand through generosity. And then the second one was ruler. I was sort of surprised at that. The ruler archetype appears in BusinessWhitt's focus on strategic leadership, systematic business growth, and helping clients build scalable, sustainable enterprises. This archetype supports the brand's authority and business strategy while maintaining the wisdom sharing focus of the primary SAGE archetype. So that would be one too. I would go in and say, I like the ruler family, but give me something that's a little bit more generosity based in that family.
A little more depth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you could really get that set up that way. So, well, John, this has been absolutely fascinating. Real quick, what was your first take? I mean, I literally sent you this report an hour ago when you read through it. What was your initial take on the Story Cycle Genie?
Yeah. My first take, 10 seconds after I had read it, was, wow, there's a lot of good stuff here. I didn't spend time like, where can I get more? Where can I get more depth? But I was like, if this is going to be the foundation of our conversation today, we're going to have a great conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. And where can people learn more about you? And do you have any tools that they could use from your website that they can start applying your program now?
So I have many tools, and the way to request tools, free tools, right, is to send an email to John at BusinessWhitt. BusinessWhitt's the name of my company. It's the word business, and my last name is WHITT. So BusinessWhitt.com. If you send me an email and just tell me what you're looking for, I can go into my archives. I've been doing this for 15 years. I have lots of things. And I don't even want to put all of them on the website because it gets too confusing. Currently on the website, we've got a couple of webinars that we're working on, 3 revenue killing mistakes that business owners make and how to fix them now. We've got a new tool coming, our new 3-day event coming up called WholeLife Leadership, which is really, I think, in my opinion, the next step for this small business owner in growing, right? Leadership is the ability to lead yourself effectively and lead others effectively. And that's a gap. Because unless you've done it for years, because you can figure it out over 20 years, but most people don't want to take 20 years to figure it out. And it's a whole life leadership. So it's about how do we integrate my life with my business and my family and my community. And so that's coming up in September, and I'm happy to provide information and guidance on that. The website, BusinessWhitt.com, lots of information and resources there. But if you're looking for anything in particular, you have a particular challenge, issue, desire, the email to me is the first step, John at BusinessWhitt.com.
Well, and you're modeling the generosity first attitude of helping equip people, whether they hire you or not, but equipping them with your knowledge and your background so they can start applying this stuff immediately.
Yeah, they hire me because they want to do it with somebody. If you want to do it by yourself, I got the stuff. I'll send it.
That is awesome. And of course, we'll have all of that and your book in the show notes so people can get that. Your book, does it cover the 5 steps and just takes everything a bit deeper? Is it a bit of a guide that way?
Yeah, absolutely. It talks about the mindset items are prerequisites. Like if you don't have those, then business ownership might not be for you. But it starts about mindset and then it goes into the 5 steps. But it's also got ways, for example, clarity. Where do you find clarity? How do you find clarity? So there's a lot more information there on how that works.
Mm-hmm.
How do you build a team? There's a lot more information on that. Even though, like I say, team is the second piece, there's steps that you can go through to do it better.
Yeah. Then to even clarify your story on the genie, I would take a PDF of your book and just add it to the resources it already knows about you and say, okay, here's his thought leadership. And it would give you even more detail on how to build that brand brain for all of your different audiences, and then the strategies to be able to activate that. And in 2.5 hours, you would have not only your brand done, you would have a campaign in place, and you'd be creating content that you could, send out immediately.
So I actually didn't know about this product before we started talking. I'd like
Well, we
to know
just
more.
launched it,
Okay.
a week and a half ago. We've been
So it's
building
not
on it
old.
for almost 2 years. We literally launched it, Monday after 4th of July, which was July 7th.
So I have, I'd love to talk more, off air on this because I'd
Yeah.
like to spend some more time understanding it for me. But I published a newsletter to my communities, about 1,200 small business owners. I would love to tell them something about what you've got going on because I think many of them, might be very interested.
Yeah. And where can our listeners subscribe to your newsletter? Because it sounds like something they could really use too.
Yes. So on my website, homepage, down at the bottom, there's a newsletter subscription box. If you just put in your email address and your name, then you go onto our subscription list, and we publish every Sunday morning.
Wow. Yeah, you are an avid writer then, no doubt.
Yeah, it's just something I found that I like doing. I have this thought process that happens all the time, and then how does that coalesce into something I can help my community with? I try to do that on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much. I appreciate you bringing your generosity first mindset to the business of story and sharing your wisdom with our listeners. Thank you.
Park, this has been awesome. I really appreciate it. Thank you.